Hello, everyone. You're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button and you can reach me that way as well. In this show, people share their stories of losing a loved one to COVID. Each of these stories is heartbreaking, inspiring, and honest. We are candid about how hard it is to move on from our grief, how we relive the events leading up to our loved one's death, and the difficulties in carrying this loss with us through the political turmoil happening in the world right now and in the face of people who don't believe COVID is real. You may hear things in our stories that make you cry, and you may hear things that make you angry. You might hear us talk about politics or the vaccine, and you may not agree. But I hope you'll keep listening. I hope you'll stay to the end of each episode and realize that each person who openly shares here has experienced deep grief over the loss of a loved one, and that's something we will all experience. We all love someone. We will all lose someone we love, and we will all grieve. These are the stories of those we lost to COVID. Thanks for being here with me today. I've got a great show planned for you. Today, I'll be talking to Kpana from New York City, and she shares her story of losing her mother to COVID in May of 2020. There was a lot of upheaval in the United States at the time, and Kpana experienced losing her mother mostly via Zoom and over the phone. She talks about her grief and her anger and how they still affect her today. Kpana also shares about her experiences in online COVID loss groups and how they're helping her. For context, we recorded this episode on July 25th, 2021. I cannot thank Kpana enough for sharing her story with me. And with that, I'd like to welcome Kpana to the show. So glad to have you here today.
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm really glad that you reached out. So where I want to start is back in March of 2020, and I'd like to have you tell me about how you first heard about COVID and when you received word of the lockdown at your mom's facility, and then just, the story of what happened.
Yeah, so, you know, I first started hearing about COVID in Wuhan, China, just from watching cable news like CNN or MSNBC or any of those news stations. But I always thought of it as something that was over there, like distant, like way, way far away from us here in the US.
Mhm.
And then I remember one of my best friends, she started telling me, this thing is serious and it could very well end up over here. And so, but still, I was kind of like, yeah, I don't know. It's over there, it's in China. It's not something that we over here really have to be worried about. And then I remember when it came to it, I heard of the first case in Washington State because I
Mhm.
remember they had like a break outbreak over there. And then that's when I was like, whoa, it's actually here now. And then I heard about there was one person who came, I think it was either Yonkers or New Rochelle here in New York City, in New York State, where we had our first case, and like a whole neighborhood or a whole town or district had to be quarantined. And then that's when I had first heard of it coming to the state of New York. And then that's when I realized that this was something that was more serious, because now they had to do contact tracing for all the people this guy had been in contact with. And it was just very new. But back then we didn't really have a lot of information. Like, we were still walking around New York City, with no mask. We were being told by the Surgeon General that we did not need to wear any mask, um, back in March. Like, I remember going on a work trip where it was probably over 100, close to 200 people on this Amtrak train, and we get to this place upstate New York in Albany, and none of us have on mask, and this was in March. And this is
Wow.
when we knew, yeah. And when I think back, and I remember going on the Amtrak with like my little disinfectant spray, and I'm wiping down the seats, and and we're all kind of making little jokes, but we're still sitting there next to each other, not socially distanced, without masks. And then fast forward a few weeks later, I found out from my sister, who was one of the primary contacts at the nursing home where my mom was, that the nursing home was going into lockdown. And we didn't really have any kind of notice. It was just kind of like, we're going into lockdown. But because my mom was in hospice, so my mom was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 2014. And originally, she was living here with me in New York City. I live in the Bronx, but we ended up moving her down. She was living with me, and then we had to move her into a nursing home because her Parkinson's was really advancing, and it
Mhm.
was very difficult to take care of her here at home. And so we moved her into a nursing home here in New York City. And but then it was still me, like, I was still the primary contact. I was still the one coordinating her care, all her doctor's appointments, and it just became a lot. So we made a decision as a family to move her down to Maryland, because I have more family there. All my siblings are there, my aunts, my uncles, my cousins, they're all in the Maryland, in the DC metro area. So we moved her to a nursing home down in Maryland. And so her Parkinson's continued to advance at a really rapid rate. She was like in end stage Parkinson's. She was actually in hospice. And so, because she was in hospice, even though the nursing home was going under lockdown, they still allowed her to have visitors. So
Hmm.
we could have still visited her in the nursing home if we would like. Now we also had a caretaker. We had hired a caretaker for her around August of 2019, because we were not too pleased with the level of care she was getting at the nursing home. And so we wanted her to have an extra set of hands, somebody that could take care of her, and kind of fill in the gap for what the nursing home staff was unable to do and was unwilling to do, I should also add. And so this lady was going in 4 days a week. And so we made a decision as a family that even though we had permission to go into the nursing home when they were under lockdown, we made a decision not to go in and just have the caretaker go in. So the only two people that were going in was the caretaker. And because she was on hospice, there was a music therapist who used to go in to see her at least once a week. And so the caretaker was still going in 4 days a week. And that was a very hard decision to make, but we didn't feel it was right to have a number of family members going in and out of the nursing home, possibly exposing our mother to COVID.
Mhm.
And so we figured it would be best if we continued having the caretaker go in. Since she was going in, she knew how to take care of our mother. She knew like the food she needed. She knew how to bathe her. She knew how to really care for her. She had the expertise to give her that skilled nursing care. So we had her still going in. And so, but the nursing home wasn't very transparent. Like, I think the only information we got from them was that they were going on the lockdown. So one day I get a text from the caretaker telling me she thinks there's COVID at the nursing home. And
Oh.
mind you, this caretaker, she was very careful. Like, she was wearing a double mask. She had the face. She was protecting herself to the best of her ability, because the nursing home, they were low on PPE. They were low on tests. At that time, it wasn't required for people coming in to be tested. They didn't have enough tests to even test the staff that was coming in. And so, but she was trying to protect herself. So she made sure she was well protected as much as she possibly could. But then she noticed that there was an isolation cart in the room next to my mom's room. And
Mm.
usually, when they would do that, there's something going on with the resident in that room that they need to be isolated from everybody else. And so she suspected that that person in that room possibly had COVID, and that's why they were being isolated the way they were. And then she noticed that the nursing home staff, whenever they would go into that room, they were being full on PPE, like the gown, the mask, the shield, everything. And so she said, Pana, I think there's COVID here. And so I reached out, I sent an email to the hospice supervisor, the nursing director, the social worker, like pretty much all my main contacts. I put them all on one email. And I asked them if there are COVID cases. They never responded to my email.
Oh.
I remember calling the nursing home, and I felt like the person at the front desk, I don't know if she wasn't authorized to say. I told her, I said, my mom is a resident there. I told her the room number where my mom was. Do you guys have COVID at the nursing home? She gave me some runaround answer. She never really answered. Then one time she said, oh, you will have to speak to my supervisor. And I remember reading newspapers from that area because as the nursing home would start to have outbreaks, like the nursing homes in the area, there were reporters who were writing about it. But I wasn't seeing my mom's nursing home being listed because the nursing home would have to disclose for it to make to the news. So I wasn't really getting any information. And so a few days after that, I get a text again from the caretaker saying that my mom's insulin levels were actually they were like insanely high, like 400s going into the 500s.
Hmm.
Because my mom had diabetes as well. And so we were like going back and forth with the nursing home and the folks at hospice, trying to get them to get her blood sugar under control. So we ended up having to beg them to take her to the hospital. And because she was under hospice care at the nursing home had to get the go ahead from the hospice supervisor for my mom to be transported to a hospital. So there was a lot of back and forth. We had to do a lot of advocacy, a lot of pushing. They were just very nonchalant about the whole thing. I say, you see this person, her insulin levels are this high. She could actually die from this, like even if we
Yeah.
put COVID to the side. So they finally sent her to the hospital, and she was diagnosed with COVID in the ER.
Oh.
And so we called, like we called the emergency room, and that's when we found out that she was diagnosed with COVID. And I remember when I heard she was diagnosed with COVID, my heart just sank because I knew that she was already frail, like she was already dealing with health issues. And then to add COVID to it, I just didn't know how her body was going to be able to handle that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it was a lot. And so we had like a Google Doc where we would kind of document everything that was going on. Like we would call, and in fact, at a time there were like all these different family members calling. That the hospital told us we had to choose one person to call to get the information because it was just too much for them to keep hearing from all these different people. So my brother was ended up being the main contact, and what he would do is he would do like a conference call to conference our siblings, and there are four of us. I'm the eldest. Um, and so, she was diagnosed. She had a UTI, she had sepsis. She, there was just a lot going on. She was having some seizure activity. Um, there was a lot going on when she was first admitted to the hospital. However, they were able to get her stabilized, and this was in late April.
Okay.
They were able to get her stabilized, and she was able to be discharged back to the nursing home, but still COVID positive, right?
Okay.
So let me backtrack a little bit. When she was diagnosed with COVID, remember we had the caretaker going in to take care of her.
Mm-hmm.
And so the caretaker had to get tested for COVID. And I was so scared. I was like, oh my God, I hope she doesn't have COVID. And thank God she was negative.
That's good.
Yeah, so she never got COVID from my mom. And that was such a relief to me, that she was negative because she has a young child, she has a family as well. All of them had to be like it was this whole big production. So, you know, she was discharged back to the nursing home. Everything had kind of stabilized. And I remember the doctor telling me she did well with COVID, That's what he said. She did well.
Mhm.
Like the fact that she was able to be stabilized and sent back. And I remember even when she was in the hospital the first time, we had to have a conversation with them because we felt like, yes, they were treating her and they were nice, but we felt like it was kind of because she was elderly and she had pre existing conditions, we didn't really feel like that extra effort was being made. And so we really had to advocate for her to let them know that she had family members who really cared about her and who wanted to see her come through.
Mhm.
Like we really had to let them know that. And so, I am very grateful for all that the hospital did, you know. But then, she was discharged back to the nursing home, and this was like around May 6th or so, I would say. She was discharged. Like I would say May 5th, if my memory is serving me correctly, that she was discharged, that she was discharged back to the nursing home. And then within 24 hours of being back at the nursing home, everything went haywire.
Hmm.
Her blood sugar, her heart rate, they weren't able to regulate her heart rate. They weren't able to regulate her blood pressure. She had a very high fever. In fact, from what I recall, she had 106 fever, 106.
Wow.
Um,
Oh.
it was like 106.8 when she was admitted back to the hospital on May 6th. Um, and her heart rate was in the 120s and her blood pressure was very low. From what they said it was like 40 over 20. So they had to um administer a central line, they call it. It's similar to an IV. They had her on two different blood pressure medications. They had her on a BiPAP machine to administer oxygen. They did not retest her for COVID because she was already positive from before, and it had only been a few days since she had to be readmitted. But
Mhm.
this time the difference was the first time she was at the hospital, she was in a medical unit for COVID patients. This time she was scheduled to the ICU.
Okay.
They said she was unresponsive. She was not responsive to voice. She wasn't moving when physical contact was made. She wasn't responding to any pain stimuli. So when I say pain stimuli, before, just from the Parkinson's, she was in a lot of pain. So even when she was at the nursing home, she was on morphine as needed. So whenever they would try to turn her or move her, she would moan. She wasn't even doing that when she was readmitted to the hospital. Her blood sugar was, around 219, but they just weren't able to get her blood pressure under control. It just, no matter what they did, like all the medications, the central line, all of that, they weren't able to get it under control. She
Mhm.
still had 102 fever, and this was May 7th. Her breathing was poor, her mental status declined, and they were just focusing on her comfort care at that point. And so around 12, like around lunchtime on May 7th, and this was like about probably 24 hours later or less than 24 hours later, May 7th, they called my brother saying that they needed to come to the hospital to say goodbye.
Mm.
And so my brother, I have three other siblings. Two of my siblings were able to go to the hospital. They could have gone in the room with my mom. They elected to stay like behind the glass, right?
Mhm.
Because my brother, he has a health condition, and then my sister has a younger child at home, so everybody was just trying to be safe but at the same time still be there to say goodbye. So we did a final Zoom call with my mom on the phone. We called in my other sister, and we were able to say goodbye. But honestly, I cannot even remember what I said during that call. Like I was just numb. Like I didn't know what to say. I don't know if she heard us. I know from what I've heard from other people, the hearing is like the last thing to go. So I told her that I loved her. That I remember saying. But beyond that, I don't really remember what I said. But I know that there was no response from her. So that was pretty much the last time I saw my mom, was through a Zoom call, through a glass, like really distant on the bed. and that was it. And I remember my siblings, like I said, they went after 12, and then at 4, around 4 or 9 that afternoon, the nurse called again because she called my brother and he conferenced me in and told us that our mom had died. Um, and I remember when the nurse told me that, I asked her if she was sure, because I was just in shock. I couldn't believe what I was hearing.
Mhm.
I asked her if she was sure, and she said yes. And she said, "I want you to know that your mom was not alone. I was with her. I was able to hold her hand. She was not alone." And so I told her, "Thank you." Um, and then we got off the phone, and I remember just letting out this scream, just scream. And then, so I have two children. I have a 13-year-old and a 4-year-old. And when I screamed, my 4-year-old ran over to me to ask me if I was okay. And so in that moment, I felt like I couldn't even fully express how I felt because I didn't want to scare her.
Yeah.
So it's like even though I was crying, I kind of had to force myself to stop in that moment because she was getting upset because I was upset. And so, you know, backtracking a little bit, while my mom was in a nursing home, like I said, we had made the decision not to visit. But the nursing home, there was no Zoom calls. When we would call, they were very like, we have other residents here. Your mom is not the only resident. You know,
Oh.
I would see these stories on TV of people they're going to the window and saying hello. My mom's room was not, it was two beds in her room. Her bed was not near the window, and there was no, so we didn't have that option to do like a window visit, and they never offered that window visit to us, so that wasn't something that we did. um but after she passed, it was this big frenzy now to try to make sure, because you had to retrieve the body within 72 hours from the hospital unless it's sent to Baltimore. I think they have like a public morgue or something there. And so, and every day that the body is at the morgue, you have to pay, like there's a charge for fee for that, if
Mm.
as the longer it goes unclaimed. So I had to kind of, because I'm the oldest, I had to put myself, I had to go into autopilot,
Mhm.
because I had to call the funeral director, tell him I had to call the hospital to figure out exactly where the funeral director had to go, what number he had to call, and give him all the information so he could go and get my mom from the hospital. Make sure that he actually picked my mom up because I was paranoid as well. So I told him, please let me know when you go. I asked him to send me a picture because I wanted to make sure he picked up the right person. And he told me, like, pretty much I had to trust him because he said, you do not want to see your mom like this.
Oh.
That's what he told me. So he wanted to wait until he had actually dressed her before he sent me a picture, and he did that. And so my siblings and I all experienced our mom's death. We all experienced the same loss, but we all participated in those last days in different ways. So, like I said, my two younger siblings went to the hospital. My
Mhm.
other sibling, she's the one right after me. She was the one, she lives closest to the funeral home. So, she is the one that went to identify the body at the funeral home. She is
Oh.
the one that brought the clothes for the funeral director to dress our mom. She is the one that had to fill out the contract for the funeral, like to for the funeral to be held. I was the one who made the arrangements for the body to be picked up. I had to contact the life insurance to put in a claim. I was the one who did the assignment of, I think it's called a funeral assignment, so that part of the life insurance policy can be used to pay for the funeral. My
Mhm.
other sister was the one who dealt with the cemetery. So she had to get like the plot. She had to make sure all of that was figured out. So we all did different things to make it come together. So that's something that I was really grateful for, that I was able to work with my siblings
Yeah.
to facilitate everything. And so we were able to have a funeral. It was very small. My siblings were there, and like I think two of my cousins went into the funeral chapel, and then the rest of my family, like my aunts and stuff, they stayed in their cars.
Hmm.
When they got to the cemetery, it's like during that time everyone was doing something different. The cemetery on their website said that 5 people were allowed on the cemetery grounds. But because my mom died from COVID, they would not allow the family on the grounds. They only allowed the funeral director and the pastor on the
Hmm.
ground. So we had strangers that we didn't know. We didn't have any pallbearers to carry the casket. We had strangers that we didn't know wearing full PPE, having to carry the casket. And then this cemetery, you have to buy what's called a concrete burial liner to put the casket in. So they don't just put the casket in the ground. And that costs extra.
Hmm.
So we had to do that. And so it was so traumatizing because I had to organize the funeral by Zoom. I had to facilitate the Zoom. Mind you, all this time I'm still on autopilot.
Mm-hmm.
I had to facilitate the Zoom. I had to see my family standing outside a gate looking at my mom's casket be carried into the funeral, into the cemetery. I facilitated the Zoom for the funeral and for the burial. And so I remember when my mom, the casket was being lowered into the ground, I just let out a scream. Like it was just, I just could not believe that my mom was actually gone. And
Yeah.
so participating in this process from so far away, like I still haven't been able to go to Maryland. Like I know people are traveling and going all around, but I have just been so traumatized by this experience. The thought of going, like I'm waiting until my daughter can be vaccinated before I can start to consider trying to make myself be able to travel. But I haven't been to my mom's grave yet. Um, we were able to get the headstone put in, and that was another process because every time we would try to get the contract done, there were a lot of delays with the cemeteries because they were backed up. Like there was
Oh,
just so many people dying. This was probably the most they've ever had to deal with at one time.
yeah.
And so it took a very long time just to get the headstone, just to put the order in for the headstone before it could even be manufactured. And so, that was pretty much the process of how COVID kind of entered our lives and just took our mother away from us. And sometimes I feel conflicted about being upset to this degree because she was in a lot of pain. And so sometimes I feel like, is it selfish of me to want her to still be here when the time she was here, she was in a lot of pain? But then it's the way that it happened as well. And of course, no matter when my mother died, I was always going to be upset. You know what I mean? And it was the way that it happened because I know under normal circumstances, I would have been in the hospital with her holding her hand. I would have been by her side.
Yeah.
I would have been there with her to let her know that her children, she's not alone. She wasn't abandoned. I could only imagine what she was going through her head. I'm like, did anybody tell her it was because of COVID that we weren't there? I don't know. She was probably wondering where her family was.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So that's it's been a lot. It's been a
Yeah.
lot. Yeah, it's been a lot. So that's how we got, how COVID came into our lives. That's the story of how she got it. We suspect that someone from the nursing home gave it to her. It might have been another resident that, they I know the governor from Maryland, Hogan, he had put a executive order in place that when the COVID patients came back to the hospital, to the nursing homes, they were supposed to be isolated. But I don't know how careful the nursing home staff was. Somebody could have brought it into her. I just don't know how she got it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I have a lot of anger towards the nursing home because I felt like even before COVID, they just didn't care. So it was like the same kind of mentality just kind of carried over, coupled with the fact that we really didn't know much about this virus when it started. There wasn't a lot of information, and we were getting a lot of conflicting information from the government and from the CDC and from the different health departments. So,
Yeah, it was definitely all the information was definitely confusing. It was
yes.
wear masks, don't wear masks,
Hmm.
and what things were important and what things weren't. I was able to look in on the window. I was able to visit my mom at the window, which I
Right,
realize now at the time the first few were quaint and, "Oh, I'm getting to do this thing," and, oh, it didn't take long before those window visits just destroyed me emotionally.
right.
Um, I saw the people who worked in there with their masks under their chin or sometimes no masks, and
Mm,
I just at times felt like, where's the importance? Where's the concern? Where's the all of the medical things that should be in place for this?
mhm,
And listening to you talk about your anger and feeling so angry and still being angry, I I really wanted to be there with my mom at the end, and that part of what you said really got to me. I had it, she had Alzheimer's. Your
yeah,
mom had Parkinson's, so you know that they're gonna die. I knew my mom
right,
was gonna die,
yeah,
but I always felt like, okay, she's gonna go into end of life and her body's gonna shut down, and I'm gonna sit there and hold her hand and kiss her head and tell her it's okay to go.
right,
And she died alone, and
mm,
nobody was with my mom at all when she passed away, and
mhm,
because she had Alzheimer's, she was confused, and
right,
I still feel so angry at the whole thing
mhm,
and
mhm,
how it happened, and
yeah,
yeah, I completely relate and just feel for you in that.
yeah, yeah, and, I realized that, and I just think about our parents and how, as those, especially those in a nursing home, they were vulnerable. I'm like,
Mhm.
were they even given masks? Did anybody care to put a mask on them? Or those people coming into their rooms, did they make sure that they were protected? They probably, because they were, it's not like they were out and about, like willingly exposing themselves. They were lying in their beds in a nursing home, and somebody brought COVID into them. And they didn't really have a choice. And then granted, there were people who were moving about who got it. And I'm not trying to imply that they did something wrong, because back then we were being told that we were being scolded for wearing masks. We were being told that we didn't need it. Leave the mask for the healthcare workers. We were getting conflicting information. It's not airborne, it's on surfaces. Like I know here in New York City, our mayor did a press conference saying that it only lives on surfaces for a few minutes, just it's just a short time. Go out and enjoy your life. Like those are the messages we were getting. And so and I know recently the former Surgeon General Jerome Adams tweeted that he and Dr. Fauci were wrong. I don't know why he dragged Dr. Fauci in there, but that's another story. He tweeted that they were wrong for telling us not to wear masks.
Ugh.
And I'm like, yeah, now you say it. But I remember you tweeting, scolding us. Because I remember I had a doctor's appointment March 2020, and I remember wearing a mask to go to that appointment and feeling like I needed to apologize for wearing a mask. Like I was doing something wrong. I was taking a mask away from a nurse or a healthcare worker by wearing it. So, it was just a lot. And I feel like when it comes to COVID grief, there's been no unification around our grief. People are questioning, well, did they have pre-existing conditions, as if they had it, they deserve to die from COVID? Like, I just don't understand. There's people don't think it's real. They don't understand why they have to be inconvenienced because of COVID. They don't want to get vaccinated. They think I mean, it's just a lot. And you don't, if somebody dies from cancer or something else, you never get questioned. How old were they? Do they have pre-existing conditions? Did they do
Mhm.
this? Did they do that? There's a lot of victim blaming here, and there's been a real lack of compassion and empathy for survivors, for families that have been severely impacted by
Yeah.
COVID. And not even just people who have lost loved ones, but long haulers who are dealing with symptoms over a year later.
Yeah, so I can tell you don't like the pre-existing condition question. I don't like that either. Well, what else did she have? What else was wrong?
Yeah,
Oh,
as
like
if,
it
somehow
it
it justifies
Mhm.
what happened. You know what it is too? It makes them feel like, okay, if she had hypertension and I don't have hypertension, then I'm okay. I don't need to worry about it because I don't. But COVID does not discriminate. There's
Mhm.
been people of all backgrounds, healthy people that have gotten it. We just don't know how. Like even the caretaker that took care of my mom, how is it I was really happy she didn't get it, but it just defies logic
Right, it
that
does.
people work closely with people who have COVID and they don't get it. You hear of people in the same household, the husband gets it, the wife doesn't get it. They're sleeping in
Mhm.
the same bed. It's really strange to me,
It
but
is.
it's just how it happens.
Yeah.
So the questioning has been really, it makes it hard. And then it's not like it's one incident that just happened. It's ongoing. You're being triggered every single day.
Mhm.
It's on the news. It's people making comments on social media, in public, on the media. It's just you're being triggered every single day, and people don't understand. People who have lost loved ones to other conditions, they don't get it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
even counselors and mental health professionals don't get it. Some of them, because this is different. This is a different type of grief.
Oh, it is. It
Yeah.
absolutely is. You've been through the anniversary of your mom's passing, which was near Mother's Day
Yes.
too.
Oh
So
God,
that, yeah,
that's
had
right.
had
Yeah,
to add a whole lot.
Mother's Day last year was a blur to me. Like, I kind of stayed off of social media because seeing all the happy Mother's Day and all of that, I had to kind of pull myself out of it a little bit for my children because they made me cards and stuff like that. This year was pretty much the same. Like they say, it gets easier, but I've actually heard that, the first 2 years are considered early grief.
Mhm.
So because it's so close to Mother's Day, it's like a sharp reminder of this loss.
Yeah.
So Mother's Day last year was hard, and Mother's Day this year was hard.
Yeah.
And so one advice I got from a member of my COVID loss support group is, she said, to have a plan for that day of what you're going to do. So it could be, I'm going to let out balloons, I'm going to light a candle, I'm going to stay in bed and rest for the day. Just have something in mind of how you would like to spend that day. And I
Yeah.
found that advice to be very helpful. Of course, it doesn't take the pain away, but at least it gives you something to focus on a little bit for that day.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the anniversary is it's hard.
Did, you experience, on the day to day, the feelings and the worries and everything leading up to when your mom passed? Because she went into the hospital the first time in April. So did you go through sort of a reliving of it?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, like I would be like, okay, this is the day that she was admitted to the hospital. This is the day that we found out that, she had COVID. This is the day. Yeah, I was kind of going through that.
Mhm.
And in fact, even leading up to the 1 year, I would be like, this is the 1 month anniversary. This is the 2 month
Uh-huh.
anniversary. This is 3 month. And I finally stopped like maybe around 7, 8 months, because somebody said, somebody I know who also, he lost his dad, he mentioned that he wasn't doing that because he felt like he was putting himself through this extra anxiety every month.
Mhm.
And then when the 1 year comes, it's like he wasn't sure how he would even handle it at that point. And so I stopped being like, okay, this is the 10th month and this is the 11th month. But yes, those few days leading up to the day itself, I was kind of reliving everything. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, a question I have for you is, well, I know that you mentioned to me when we talked on the phone before, this interview, that the part of the reason why you hired the caregiver, the private caretaker for your mom, was because you had already filed a complaint against the facility, before the pandemic, right?
Yeah, my sister did, yes. So a
Yeah.
family file, yeah. Mhm.
So when all of this was going on and even afterwards, did you contact anybody in government, make any more complaints? Did contact tracing get a hold of you for any reason because of
N
your mom?
No. So
No?
we didn't know. So we didn't contact, we talked about it, like, to figure out what was going on at the nursing home, but everything just happened so fast with her. Like, at that time, we were just concentrating on her care in the hospital. And then when she got discharged back, because the thing is, the length of time between when I first asked them if she had COVID, I mean, not if she had COVID, if COVID was at the nursing home, and when she had to be taken to the ER, it was a very short period of time. But we were considering reporting them to the state. Like, if they had refused to take her to the hospital, we were going to report them.
Yeah.
But the issue I have with the reporting to the state is, when we reported them to the state the first time, I felt like the state gave them a heads up that they were coming, and this was before everything happened. So when the state came to do the inspection, they actually brought in extra staff from other facilities, and the place was clean. It was running the way it's supposed to be. So my thing is, if you're coming to do an investigation, why would you even give them a heads up that you're coming? Because
Right.
you want to observe them in their natural environment, not this fake environment that they create to make it seem like everything is okay. So yeah, I mean, and it was really, it was tough. It made me kind of question, like, should I have just left my mom here in New York and just kind of toughed it out? But then I found out that New York, we had our own issues with nursing homes and COVID, where, one of the nursing homes that's been featured in the news as losing so many residents from COVID was the nursing home that my mom was at when she was in New York.
Oh.
So yeah, I'm like, oh my gosh, she probably would have been caught up in that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it's like there was just no good situation when it came to the nursing homes. It was really a tragedy. And I know a lot of the states, a lot of them have filed for immunity from any
Yes.
kind of liability, which, I think a lot, because they're gonna be like, oh, it was a pandemic, we didn't have the information. And I remember the nursing home director telling my sister they don't have enough tests. They don't even have enough tests to test the folks coming in.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, yeah, so we didn't, during that time she was in the hospital, we didn't call the state to report the nursing home. They sent my sister flowers after my mom died. Those flowers ended up in the trash.
Mhm.
I just have a lot of anger because they just did not care. There
Yeah.
was just this kind of, you know, I don't know. I don't know. And I know nursing homes have their own issues. They're understaffed. You know, you might have like one GNA or one CNA to maybe 10, 15, 20 residents. They're
Mhm.
burned out, they're underpaid.
Yes.
So there's a lot of issues, but at the same time, I have to advocate for my mom. Like I have to make sure that she's getting the best care. Like I remember us having to beg them to wash her hair because we went to visit her and her hair, like you could tell her hair hadn't been washed. And then the other day I'm looking up something online and then I see there's these inflatable sinks that some care facilities use, and I'm like, damn, I wish I had known of this when she was alive, because we could have washed her hair instead of begging them to do it.
Yeah.
So it's really, the lack of compassion, just caring for another human being. Like if another human being is soiled, you don't leave them
Mhm.
3 4 hours in a soiled diaper.
Yeah.
Like, well, they're supposed to be turned every 2 hours. You don't just leave them so they can get bed sores.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a lot of anger towards them, and
Mhm.
yeah. So
Yeah, I do too. After the outbreak at my mom's, I learned about the outbreak at my mom's facility in a newspaper article. I was
oh wow,
Googling to try to find out what was going on there because I
right.
wasn't getting a lot of information, and that's where I found out about the outbreak. It was, oh, so the anger just went through the roof for me. I avoided the road to the place where my mom lived,
Hmm.
and they put big, big flags out there that said "Heroes work here."
Yes, yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I that just lit me up every single time. I could not drive by without breaking down and crying in the car or just feeling so angry. And before all this happened, the people that work there, I knew their names.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
knew the cook. They were so kind to my mom. A lot of the time, my mom could be really cranky when she was in a delusion from her Alzheimer's.
Right,
But, there were all these wonderful people, and I know that most of them got COVID in the outbreak there because it was very it just went through the whole facility with the employees and most of the residents. But
right, right.
yeah, I
Yeah,
just
yeah, that heroes work here. The nursing home where my mom was, they also did that. And I remember my
mm,
sister told me when she saw that, it really upset her. She had a similar reaction to what you had.
yeah.
Yeah. So and I try, it's hard because I imagine what, like, even the nurses and the doctors and the frontline workers, the healthcare professionals, I can only imagine how scared they must have been.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I'm like, okay, but my mom was vulnerable. She was, she didn't really have like, it was just, I don't know, it's a lot to process. And I feel like even to this day, it causes me a lot of anxiety, like just being around people.
Mhm.
And I've noticed, like, even within our COVID lost community, all of us have different, of course, we're all different people. Everyone has different reactions to things. But I've seen people be able to meet up with each other, like do like an outdoor lunch. And I still can't bring myself to do that.
Yeah.
I know that COVID Survivors for Change is having a walk in August, and and I can't, and a bunch of people are going to be participating, and I just get so anxious, like the thought,
Yeah.
like I have a my son has a birthday coming up, or close to that time, but still, I have a lot of anxiety. I have a lot of insomnia. I haven't slept well for the past year. Like I've tried different medications and none of them seem to work. I'm on anxiety pills that I use as needed. It's been a lot to have to just deal with the emotional part of it. Being around people, a lot of people. I do it if I have to. Like if I have to go to the grocery store, I'll
Mhm.
go. But it's like in and out. Socializing with friends. I haven't socialized with any friends for over a year.
Wow.
I haven't seen my siblings. I haven't because I'm always scared, that I don't know. I just
Yeah.
I feel like it's gonna be a process for me to
Mhm.
reintegrate back into society, honestly.
Yeah.
I return to work 1 day a week, July 13th, and it's been tough for me because I'm a very social person in the office. So socially distancing from people at work is hard, and we're back in the office, vaccinated and unvaccinated.
Yeah.
So that makes it harder because I don't know who's and I know some people are vaccinated, but I don't know everybody's status.
Mhm.
And then we're hearing about breakthrough infections. I have a daughter who's not vaccinated. She's too young.
Yeah.
So, I know people act as if kids cannot get COVID, but I know they can.
Yeah.
And of course, it's very low percentage that will be adversely affected by it. But I always think, is my child going to be in that 1% or point whatever percent?
Mhm.
Yeah. So that's, some of the long-term things that I'm dealing with. I have to figure out a way to kind of manage because one thing I realized with this pandemic is that the world is moving on. The world is not patient enough to wait on our community to get to a place where we feel comfortable. They're not waiting on us. They're out, they're going to concerts, they're going to shows, they're going out to eat, they're traveling, they're exercising their quote unquote rights and freedoms.
Yeah.
They don't have time to wait for me to get comfortable because I lost my mom to COVID,
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
know?
there is a huge push for this going back to normal, and I'm making air quotes while I say that because I just can't stand that phrase.
Yeah,
It's for
yeah,
you and
me too.
I and other
Mhm.
people that I've talked to, there's no normal, and it's so hard to even figure out what that is. You went through an incredibly traumatic experience from a distance, a lot of the
Mhm.
time behind a screen,
Right.
working things out for your mom over Zoom and so disconnected, it makes complete sense that it would be hard for you to figure out how to get and move back into that connection. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. And
yeah.
and on top of that, having to balance remote learning for my children at home
Mhm.
while I'm working from home. And then I work for a disability nonprofit here in New York City. And so it's like COVID, because
Right.
we're talking about schools and reopening and COVID cases. And then I'm talking to parents, and parents are telling me, you might have some parents who don't think COVID is real, or they don't think. So there's those little triggers that might come into my work life. And so, yeah, it's, you know, and I just have to bite my tongue and be as diplomatic as I can be. Because everybody has different views.
That's one of my questions I ask everybody is, what do you say to people who believe COVID isn't real?
Well, I tell them COVID is very real. COVID took my mother. COVID killed my mother. And I know it took her. I know she got it. I know there are thousands and thousands and millions of people that have contracted COVID, right?
Mhm.
So for them to say that COVID is not real, they're being delusional. They're being willfully ignorant to ignore the science, right? They're being willfully ignorant to ignore what we've been seeing. what
Mhm.
families have shared, right? Because I even heard this thing that people were saying that we were crisis actors pretending that our loved ones died from. Like, really? This is something I would want to
Oh,
pretend? I would
yeah.
have been there with my mom. Like, this is not something anybody asked for,
Oh, yeah, I would have
you know?
absolutely been there with my mom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think people say it's not real because some of them don't know anybody who's had COVID. Some
Mhm.
of them have been they don't see it as a blessing, but I've read people say I haven't worn a mask this entire pandemic and I didn't get COVID, so it's not real.
Yeah.
And I'm like, you don't realize how lucky you are.
Mhm.
But yeah, so that's what I tell them. They're being delusional and they're choosing not to believe the facts that are right in front of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I know that you mentioned a number of people by name who were in positions of power, like I believe your governor and the mayor of New York. Is there any one person out of all of those that you would like to name by name that you feel is responsible or that you would like to call out for not doing enough?
I would say the former President Trump, because I felt like we lacked the leadership that we needed from the top. And
Hmm.
granted, I'm not saying this because I excuse any mistakes that Cuomo made, or any mistakes that de Blasio made, or any mistakes that Hogan from Maryland made. But there was a lack of leadership from the top. There were times we didn't have enough PPE, and I remember Trump going on TV and saying they are not shipping clerks. We were getting conflicting information from the CDC. The CDC was being politicized,
Hmm.
even calling the whole vaccine effort Operation Warp Speed, right? Of Because we all know that it takes years to create a vaccine. I
Yeah.
felt like there was a lot of trust that was damaged from the way this entire pandemic was handled. Them telling us, oh, everything's going to be fine by Easter. They're standing up there doing their press conferences. They're not wearing masks. He's talking about UV light and disinfectant. It was just a mess. And I feel like so many more people died. And they knew. News is coming out. There have been books that have been written. They knew how bad this was.
Hmm.
And they gave us the wrong information knowing what they knew. And I'm not saying nobody would have died, but we wouldn't have had as many deaths as we've had if we had the right information from the beginning, and if they did what they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
to me, a lot of the blame lays on them.
Yeah.
A lot of the blame lays on them, and I feel like money was valued over lives.
Hmm.
Yeah. I feel that way.
Yeah.
So I have a lot of anger, and that's why when he lost the election, I felt like we finally had a chance to try to, it's not going to bring the lives back of the hundreds of thousands of people who have died, but we stand a chance of preventing more deaths,
Hmm.
at least at that scale.
Yeah.
And so I think the federal government, and that's why I'm totally in favor of a commission to investigate how the same way we had a 9/11 commission. I'm in favor of a commission to investigate how the COVID pandemic was handled.
Yeah, there's also a movement to create a national day of recognition. I believe
Yes.
they want it to be the first Monday in March.
Yes, I know Marked by COVID has been very instrumental in that. And
Yeah.
I know that COVID Survivors for Change is another organization that has done a lot of advocacy around having memorials and doing advocacy for paid leave,
Mhm.
and those kinds of efforts. So we need like, remember I was saying there's been no unification around our grief. I know there are organizations like the Yellow Heart Memorial that has done a lot of memorials around the country. They've even expanded to some other countries. So
Mhm.
there are organizations out there that are really trying to find ways to remember our loved ones.
Yeah.
And so, but I think it would be really good to have a national memorial, and
Yes.
not just focus on the fact that I feel like even with the current president, right, with Biden, for July 4th, it was like, yes, we can have our barbecues and we can.
Yep.
And I'm like, yeah, but there's millions of people that are still grieving.
Mhm.
And he was supposed to be the president who was empathetic and who understands grief, right? Because I remember around the inauguration, I really appreciated what he did when he had that time to kind of remember the people who we've lost from COVID. But I don't want his administration to lose sight of that because we're still here. We haven't gone
Mm.
away.
Yeah.
And there are
Oh,
people
yeah.
still dying, even now. There are people still dying now. And so I totally support a national day of remembering for all the lives that we've lost to COVID. And I support, all the long haulers who are still dealing with the effects of COVID. Some of them, there's a lot of health issues that they've been dealing with, and there are certain benefits that they don't qualify for. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah,
yes.
we need some work around that too so that
Yeah.
they can get the medical help that they need without, I get the sense that from what I've read, some of them feel like doctors say it's all in their head.
Yes. Mhm.
Oh,
Mhm. Yes. So
yeah.
imagine you can't even if you wanted to apply for a benefit, right?
Mhm.
And if your doctor doesn't believe you and they don't want to fill out the form, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a whole community of people, and that's why I'm hoping that this new administration cannot for we can they cannot forget the people that are still here. This was not just something for inauguration day to have a light some candles and pray. This
Yeah.
is going to be ongoing, that they
Yes.
cannot forget us because we're still here.
Yeah, we'll be
Yeah.
adding names to a national memorial for quite a number of years probably.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Definitely, definitely. So that's definitely something that, I mean, and that's why I really applaud all these organizations. I mean, I try to get involved as much as I can. I really applaud the folks that have stepped up to lead these organizations and mobilize people around these different issues so that we are not forgotten.
Mhm.
Because I could see, because people just want to move on. They don't,
Yep,
yeah,
they do.
yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned community, your community support group. Is that COVID community support group? Is it an online group? I mean,
Yes.
how has it helped you?
So there are two groups that I'm in. One of them is a COVID loss support group for survivors and loved ones of people who have lost loved ones to COVID. And the last time I checked, we had over 10,000 members and growing. And then there's also COVID for Survivors for Change that has a weekly group called COVID Connections. So both groups have weekly Zoom call meetings. So they're Zoom. And
Mhm,
the COVID loss group is more peer to peer support. And then the COVID Connections, we have licensed psychologists and social workers that are on there. And we have a presentation at the beginning. And then we have breakout rooms where each room has a social worker or a psychologist to kind of facilitate the breakout room.
mhm.
And I would tell you, these groups have been a godsend to me. Like to be talking to people who actually get it. Like even between me and my siblings, right? We all express our grief in different ways. I
Yes.
have siblings who they prefer to just talk to me about how they're feeling, but then there are some days where it's too much for them to handle, where they might not be in that space to talk about our mom, but
Mhm.
I may have something that I want to talk about or that I want to get out. So I feel like these groups give me the opportunity to be in a space with people who get it and with people who listen. And not only because I'm getting something from the group, I'm also able to give support to others. And I think that's important. I find that to be very therapeutic to be able to listen to somebody else because it's been over a year for me. And I'm not saying it's easy now, but there might be someone who just lost a loved one. They
Mhm.
may have lost a loved one a week ago or 2 months ago, or the grief is still very fresh for them. And I'm thinking that sharing my story with them or even listening to them can help them and kind of give them some strategies. There may be some things that I've done that they may be able to do that might be able to help them through their grief. And
Yeah.
so these groups have been, I'm very grateful to individuals who have been able to start these groups because like I said, we have some mental health professionals that are not well trained in how to deal with COVID grief. And so
Yeah.
being in these spaces have really been able to give me a platform and a voice to be able to express myself, but also to be able to provide support for others as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you definitely have today. I sat here and listened to you and just felt so moved by your story, but also by the similarities and you being so candid about your anger, because I still have so much anger.
Right.
And
Mm-hmm.
I my sister and I have grieved in very, very different ways that right now has sort of separated our grief, and we're in two completely different places with it. And
Right.
it makes it difficult because I only have one sibling.
Right.
And right now I spend a lot of my feelings and my grief feelings just working them through on my own or with my therapist.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I really, really appreciate you sharing today. This has been really
Yes.
lovely.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate you listening and
Yeah.
giving me this platform to be able to share my story.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pana.
You're very welcome. I'm glad we were able to finally speak.
I know, I know. We did reschedule a couple times, but we
Yes,
got
yes,
it done.
we got it
I
done.
I had faith all along.
Yes, yes. I'm glad we were able to get it done.
Me too. And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. If you like this episode, please share the show. Share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, rate and review this podcast on your favorite listening platform. And then go rate it on Apple Podcast, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.